The 3 a.m. silence of the diner was no longer a sanctuary, it was a stage. Sloane Rivers wiped the grease-slicked counter for the 10th time, her movements a rhythmic mask for the tremor in her hands. She could feel him before the door chime even announced his arrival. Ji-hoon Jae-kwon didn't just walk into a room, he claimed it, his presence a physical weight that pressed against the polished resilience she had spent a decade perfecting. He took the same booth in the corner, a dark silhouette against the flickering neon of the open sign. His bespoke black suit looked untouched by the humid city night, his hair still possessing that military precision that made him look like a statue carved from obsidian. His silent men in black hovered at the periphery, but Jay's gaze was fixed solely on her, a gaze that felt like a hand around her throat. He didn't order. He waited. Sloane approached with a carafe of black coffee, the porcelain rattling slightly against the tray. She felt his dark, steady eyes scanning her, looking for a crack in the waitress persona she had donned like armor. Since the night she had shattered the silence with that ancient, scathing Korean curse, the air between them had been a live wire. She had revealed a digital fingerprint of a past she was supposed to have buried, and now he was here to dig up the rest. "You're late with the refills, Sloane," he murmured. His voice was a low, dangerous velvet that carried the weight of a decision already made. "The grill was acting up, Mr. Kwon," she replied, her voice holding that quiet, defiant grace. She poured the coffee, her eyes focused on the dark liquid rather than the man who seemed to own the air between them. He didn't touch the cup. Instead, he leaned forward, the movement bringing the scent of clean, expensive cologne and the chill of the underworld closer to her. "A woman who speaks the Sajon dialect doesn't belong behind a counter in a place that smells of old grease," he said, his gaze pinning her in place. "It's a language for queens and ghosts. Which one are you?" Sloane gripped the handle of the carafe until her knuckles turned white, the scars of her past hidden beneath her skin. She saw her own reflection in his dark eyes, young, tired, and trying too hard to look brave. He was testing her resolve, waiting for her to slip again, to provide another piece of the puzzle that was her father's legacy. "I'm the one who's just trying to finish her shift," she whispered, though the lie tasted bitter. Jay leaned back, a ghost of an ironical smile flickering across his sharp cheekbones. "We both know that's a lie," he said softly. "You're already visible, Sloane, and I'm the only one who can make sure you don't." The damp air of 4 a.m. clung to Sloane like a second skin as she stepped out of the diner's back entrance. The shift was over, but the weight of Jay's gaze still felt like a physical brand on her shoulders. She gripped the strap of her bag, her survival instincts screaming as the rhythmic hum of the city shifted into a predatory silence. The attack was not subtle. 2 men emerged from the mouth of a nearby alley, their movements lacking the lethal elegance she had grown used to seeing in Jay's booth. These were blunt instruments, rival gangsters who had recognized the Sajon dialect she had accidentally revealed and saw her as a soft target to reach the Kwon organization. "Sloane Rivers," one hissed, his hand reaching for her arm with a sense of ownership that made her blood turn to ice. She pivoted, her polished resilience snapping into a combat stance her father had taught her long ago. She managed to dodge the first lunging grasp, but the second man moved to cut off her escape toward the main street. Just as the metal of a gun barrel caught the flickering street lamplight, the roar of a high-performance engine tore through the alley. A black car, so clean it looked unreal against the grimy brickwork, lurched to a halt, cutting through the space between Sloane and her pursuers. The driver's side door opened, and Ji-hoon Jae-kwon stepped out into the rain. He didn't look drunk on power, he looked like a weapon wrapped in fabric, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the headlights. The atmosphere dropped several degrees as his controlled danger filled the alley. "I don't repeat myself when it comes to what is mine," Jay said, his voice a low and sharp blade that carried more threat than the rival's weapon. The rival gangsters hesitated, their shaking fingers betraying their fear of the man standing before them. In a blur of motion, Jay moved, not with chaotic anger, but with a terrifying precision. He disarmed the first man with a sickening crack of bone and a movement so fast it stole Sloane's breath. He didn't look at the fallen men as he turned to her, his dark and steady eyes scanning her for injuries. He reached out, his warm hand wrapping firmly around her wrist in a forced extraction that felt like both a rescue and a cage. "Get in," he commanded, the steel behind his voice leaving no room for defiance. As the back door opened like a dark mouth, Sloane realized her small life was officially over. She was no longer just a waitress. She was the exposed secret in the center of Jay's world. The black car moved through the city like a predatory shadow, the hiss and clink of the diner replaced by the heavy, expensive silence of leather and climate control. Sloane sat stiffly beside Jay, her polished resilience, a thin veil over the adrenaline still thundering in her veins. They passed through towering iron gates that opened like the jaws of a monster, revealing a sprawling estate that rose out of the mist, a gilded fortress that made her small life feel like a distant, faded memory. Jay did not speak until the car settled into the circular drive. He stepped out and held the door, his lethal elegance intensified by the moonlight. "This is the only trap tonight that ends with you alive," he murmured, his voice a velvet control that left her no choice but to follow. Inside, the mansion smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume, a jarring contrast to the old grease of the diner. Jay led her into a high-tech command center where the walls were lined with flickering surveillance monitors. Sloane stopped, her breath catching sharp and painful as she looked at the screens. It wasn't just the mansion perimeter being watched. One screen showed the diner's back entrance, another showed her cramped apartment building, a third showed her walking to work 2 weeks ago, her one hand curled in her pocket as she scanned the street. She saw her own striking features captured in high definition, young, tired, and trying too hard to look brave. "I've been near my business for weeks," Jay said, his dark and steady gaze pinning her as he watched her reaction to the footage. "Because I watch what matters." A chill went through her that had nothing to do with the rain. Seeing her own face mirrored back at her from a dozen angles was the final outcome of her illusion of privacy. Her simple life hadn't just been interrupted, it had been a mistake she was finally being forced to answer for. "You aren't just a waitress," Jay whispered, stepping close enough that his presence felt like a wall. "You are the daughter of a fixer, and these screens are the only reason you aren't already in Beck's hands." Sloane stared at the monitors, realizing she wasn't a guest or even a prisoner. She was an exposed secret that Jay had been observing long before she ever spoke a word of Korean to him. The silence in the command center was absolute, save for the hum of the monitors that displayed the fragments of Sloane's life. Jay turned away from the screens, his sharp cheekbones illuminated by the cold blue light as he closed the distance between them. He didn't look like a man seeking a conversation. He looked like a predator closing in on the truth he had been tracking for weeks. "The curse you used in the diner?" Jay began, his voice dropping to that controlled, dangerous whisper that made Sloane's skin heat. "That isn't a language learned from a textbook or a movie. It is the dialect of the Sajon, the invisible hands that moved for the sole elite 20 years ago. Who taught you to speak like a ghost, Sloane?" Sloane felt the weight of his gaze like a hand on her throat, pressing against the locked door in her mind. She could feel her polished resilience finally cracking. She looked at her own hands, at the faint scars on her knuckles that spoke of a childhood spent in fighting and surviving. "My father," she whispered, the words scraping out like glass. He was an American who went to Seoul to disappear, but instead he became a man who fixed things for people like you. He didn't want me to be a waitress. He wanted me to be a shield. She looked up at Jay, her deep, observant eyes defiant despite the fear. He taught me their language so I would know when they were coming for us. He taught me that every word is a weapon if you know how to hone the edge. I was raised in the shadows of the Blue House and the back rooms of Gangnam. I wasn't just his daughter, I was his masterpiece. Jay's jaw tightened, his expression shifting into something that looked like restrained fury, mixed with a dark admiration. He reached out, his thumb brushing her cheek with a tenderness that shocked her, more than his violence ever could. He raised a tactician and told the world she was a soft target, Jay murmured, his dark and steady eyes pinning her. He didn't just teach you to survive, Sloane. He taught you how to own the air in a room before you even speak. You are not a mistake. You are the most dangerous, exposed secret I have ever found. The blue light of the monitors cast long, predatory shadows across the command center as Jay stepped back, his lethal elegance replaced by a calculating stillness. He reached for a tablet on the sleek console, his military precision evident in every movement. On the screen was a transcript, an intercepted message from Chairman Beck's inner circle, written in a code that looked like standard business correspondence to the untrained eye. "My analysts see a dispute over territory," Jay said, his dark and steady eyes never leaving Sloane's face. "But I think they are missing the tone. I think they are missing the ghost." He handed her the tablet, the contact of their fingers sending a shocking wave of awareness through her that she fought to ignore. Sloane took the device, her deep, observant eyes scanning the lines. She didn't just read the words, she felt the lethal vocabulary her father had drilled into her soul. The syntax was jagged, the honorifics used in a way that insulted the recipient through over-politeness, a classic Sajon tactic. "It's not a territory dispute," Sloane whispered, her polished resilience shifting into the tactician persona Jay had sensed. She pointed to a specific phrasing regarding the harvest of the winter plum. "This is an archaic reference to a blood debt from 20 years ago. They aren't asking for your docs, Jay. They are telling you that they know where the fixer's blood is buried." Jay leaned in close. His presence felt like a wall as he watched her deconstruct the threat with a quiet, defiant grace. He realized then that she wasn't just a masterpiece of survival. She was a weapon of intelligence that his organization had been lacking. "They think you are a soft target because they see a waitress," Jay murmured, his voice a velvet control that vibrated in the small space between them. "But you see the hidden meanings they think are invisible." He straightened, his gaze burning with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "This is your first lesson, Sloane. In my world, information is the only shield that doesn't break. You are going to translate every breath they take until I find the man who thinks he can claim you." Sloane gripped the tablet, the exposed secret of her past, now becoming the foundation of a dangerous alliance. She was no longer just a mistake in a car. She was the only person who could hear the death sentence before it was carried out. The gilded fortress felt colder than usual as the first reports of the sabotage reached the command center. Jay stood before the surveillance monitors, his broad shoulders tense beneath his bespoke shirt. The primary feed from the port of Incheon showed a shipping lane in chaos. Cargo containers marked with Jay's sigil were being systematically diverted or seized. It wasn't a standard heist, it was a surgical strike designed to burn down the world Jay had built. Sloane stood beside him, her deep, observant eyes fixed on a grainy image of a man overseeing the seizure. He wore a heavy wool coat, his back to the camera, but his posture carried a control wrapped in velvet that made her blood turn to ice. The man turned slightly, and even through the rain-smeared lens, the silhouette of his scarred jawline was unmistakable. "Beck," she whispered, her voice thin from exhaustion and sudden terror. The name landed like a stone in water, heavy and final. This was the ghost in the room, the man who had turned her father into a myth and forced her to live a life of invisible labor. He hadn't just resurfaced. He had followed the linguistic slap she had delivered in the diner, tracing the digital fingerprint of her father's dialect straight to Jay's doorstep. Jay's dark and steady eyes flicked to her, his restrained fury palpable. "He is targeting the routes your father once secured for my predecessor," Jay said, his voice a low and sharp blade. "He isn't just taking my cargo, he's reclaiming the debts he thinks you owe him." The realization hit Sloane like a physical blow. Beck wasn't just a rival syndicate head. He was the architect of her worst memories, a man who believed people were property to be collected. By finding her, he had found a door into Jay's house. "He knows I'm here," Sloane said, her polished resilience buckling under the weight of the exposed secret. "And he's going to keep destroying everything you touch until I walk out that front door on my own." Jay stepped closer, his presence like a wall between her and the monitors. He reached out, his hand warm and firm, as he cupped her face, forcing her to meet his lethal elegance. "Then let him watch," Jay murmured, his steel behind the voice absolute. "He thinks you are a soft target he can snatch from the shadows. He is about to learn that I do not allow what is mine to be taken." The ghost in the room had finally stepped into the light, but as Jay's military precision began to coordinate a counterstrike, Sloane realized the price of loyalty was about to become a death sentence for everyone involved. The gilded fortress transformed into a chamber of preparation as the night of the gala arrived. Sloane stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, her simple white-collared uniform replaced by a gown of midnight silk that draped over her frame like liquid shadow. Her hair, usually pinned in a professional tight bun, was styled into an elegant, intricate crown that made her striking features appear regal and untouchable. She felt like a weapon wrapped in fabric, a masterpiece of polished resilience designed for a single, lethal purpose. Jay entered the room, his lethal elegance amplified by a tuxedo that emphasized the commanding presence of his broad shoulders. He stopped a few feet away, his dark and steady eyes scanning her with an intensity that made her skin heat despite the cold. He didn't offer a compliment, he offered a vow. "Tonight you are not a waitress or a ghost," Jay murmured, his voice a velvet control, as he draped a necklace of diamonds around her throat. "You are my eyes. Every word spoken in that room is a door into my house. Translate the whispers they think I cannot hear." The gala was a sea of expensive perfume and hidden meanings, held in a ballroom where the sole elite moved with the grace of predators. Sloane clung to Jay's arm, her deep, observant eyes scanning the crowd. She wasn't looking at the jewelry, she was listening for the Sajon dialect, the sharp, ancient syntax of the men who fix things. As they moved through the crowd, she caught a fragment of conversation near a curtained alcove. It was the linguistic slap she had been waiting for. A group of Beck's associates were discussing the harvest of the winter plum, the same archaic code Jay's analysts had missed. Their tone was overpolite, a lethal vocabulary that signaled an imminent strike against Jay's shipping routes. "They're moving the deadline," Sloane whispered against Jay's shoulder, her breath catching, as she saw Chairman Beck watching them from across the room. "The debt isn't being reclaimed at the docks, it's being reclaimed tonight here." Jay's jaw tightened, his military precision instantly calculating the exits. He pulled her closer, his hand warm and firm on her waist. "Then the dance is over," he said, his steel behind the voice. "Absolute. We don't wait for the death sentence. We carry it out ourselves." The transition from the ballroom's expensive perfume to the cold sheets of rain was violent and instantaneous. The dance of danger shattered as a volley of gunfire tore through the glass canopy of the gala's terrace, the sound, a death sentence, ringing out over the screams of the elite. Jay reacted with military precision, shielding Sloane with his broad shoulders as they dived toward the shadows of the parking valet. But even the most controlled danger has its limits. A sharp, guttural groan escaped Jay's lips as a stray round found a gap in his weapon-wrapped frame, the crimson stains spreading rapidly across his crisp white shirt. "Jay!" Sloane's voice was thin from exhaustion and sudden panic, but her survival instincts, honed by years of her father's training, snapped her into a cold, lethal focus. She caught him before he collapsed, her striking features set in a grim mask of polished resilience. The gilded fortress was miles away, and Beck's men were already closing in, their shaking fingers on the triggers of their weapons as they scanned the darkness. "Leave me," Jay managed to rasp, his dark and steady eyes flickering with the pain of a debt being reclaimed in blood. "You are the exposed secret. Get out." "No," Sloane snapped, her deep, observant eyes scanning the alleyways for a door into safety. "I do not allow what is mine to be taken." She hauled his weight against her, the midnight silk of her gown now smeared with the price of loyalty. With the gala's perimeter locked down by Beck, she couldn't rely on Jay's organization. She had to reach into the worst memories of her past. Reaching into the hidden pocket of her gown, she pulled out a burner phone and dialed a sequence that hadn't been used in a decade, the private line of the ghosts who had once served her father. "The harvest of the winter plum is failing," she whispered into the receiver, using the sharp and ancient syntax that only the Sajon recognized. "The fixer's daughter needs a shield at the south gate. Now." For a heartbeat, there was only the hiss and clink of rain against the pavement. Then a low, gravelly voice answered in the same lethal vocabulary. "We are coming, little ghost." Within minutes, a nondescript van screeched to a halt, and men with sharp cheekbones and military precision emerged not to capture, but to extract. As they hoisted Jay into the vehicle, Sloane looked back at the gala, her hand warm and firm on Jay's pulse. She was no longer just a mistress of silence or a soft target. She had called upon the shadows of Gangnam to protect the man who had seen her for who she truly was. The simple life was dead, and as the van vanished into the noir fog, Sloane knew the final outcome would be written in the blood of those who dared to touch Jay. The gilded fortress was no longer a place of observation, but a war room where two worlds finally spoke with one voice. Jay sat at the head of the obsidian table, his lethal elegance restored, though his movements remained stiff from the price of loyalty he had paid in the alley. Beside him, Sloane stood with her striking features, illuminated by the cold glow of the surveillance monitors, her midnight silk gown replaced by a sharp, tailored suit that signaled her transformation from waitress to strategist. The ghost in the room had been cornered. Through the linguistic skills Sloane had inherited from her father, they had lured Chairman Beck into a false sense of security, using the Sajon dialect to feed him a death sentence disguised as a surrender. When the final confrontation came at the Incheon docks, it wasn't Jay's military precision alone that ended the threat. It was Sloane's tactician mind that predicted Beck's every move. "You thought she was a door into my house," Jay said, his voice a low and sharp blade, as Beck was brought before them in the rain-slicked shipyard. Jay's hand was warm and firm as he reached out to clasp Sloane's fingers, presenting a united front that owned the air between them. "But she is the house itself, and you are no longer welcome." Beck looked at Sloane, his shaking fingers a testament to his shattered control wrapped in velvet. He recognized the polished resilience in her eyes, the same look her father had carried. Sloane didn't flinch. She spoke one last time in the sharp and ancient tongue of the fixer, a final outcome that stripped Beck of his remaining dignity before Jay's men led him into the permanent shadows. Months later, the 3 a.m. silence of the city felt different. Sloane sat in the back of the black car, her deep, observant eyes scanning the surveillance monitors that now guarded their shared interests. She was no longer just a waitress or a soft target surviving on scraps. She had become the queen who whispered the hidden meanings of power into Jay's ear, her lethal vocabulary, the foundation of their new empire. As Jay leaned closer, his presence felt like a wall of absolute protection. Sloane realized the exposed secret was now their greatest strength. They were no longer mistakes or ghosts.